Thanks, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to take through some of the findings, but I'm also going to just get a backdrop first in terms of why this is important and where do we stand today, because I think whilst many of us recognise the world is changing very fast, also many of us recognise not much has changed. So when we look forward, we're sort of firstly just taking a step back and looking at what's on top of mind for CEOs. When we look at data analytics, one of the things we've just done is a survey. You can see the stats under there in terms of areas where the reasons why people aren't moving forward. But what we did is we actually did a 2019 survey and compared the exact same questions as 2009. So it's a 10-year Facebook-style challenge. What we asked is, how critical is data in managing your organisation? How are you leveraging data and how critical you manage that in terms of looking to manage your organisation from a control standpoint, from a forecasting standpoint, etc., etc. So generally across the board, back in 2009 and 2019, it was rated very high as a critical component to how I run my organisation. In 2009, it was identified there's a large gap between actually the quality of data I've got and my technology, therefore, to help me do those outcomes. So whether it be control, whether it be forecasting, whether it be managing my people, etc. So a lot's changed since then. So where do we end up in 2019? The same spot. So actually no change. So underlying now, obviously there's a change in terms of maybe that this is a perception measure, so it's not an absolute measure, so there is some change in when you look at that. But underlying this, organisations haven't shifted vastly forward. You are seeing some move forward now, but there has been a lot of reluctance to change or velocity to change. And I'll go through some of the reasons why and things to think through, particularly as we look through the survey, the results of our work and things to think about through there. So a lot of people cite talent, data siloing, lack of sharing. So where is my data in my organisation? Data governance is a big topic. It's not sexy, but without good data, there's no point trying to do analytics, no point trying to do RPA or other things, because you don't have good data, then you're making bad decisions, even in today's basic world. So the second thing is talent. And this is a view on talent. So one of the things when we speak to organisations, they look to the future enhancing their control functions, all their front office, their sales teams, etc. Talent around data, talent around AI, around new technologies is very, very thin. We feel that here in Singapore, but the rest of the region feels it more. So one of the things to be cautious of is saying, I can't get talent, because actually to find that talent in other markets is far harder and it's actually more expensive. So you want to go hire a data team in Jakarta or Vietnam or Philippines, actually they can be more expensive than here and harder to find. That is why a lot of the big technology companies are basing themselves here, because they can find the teams here. It does mean it's expensive, but we do have more talent than elsewhere. So as a location, we do have a competitive advantage. When we look at artificial intelligence, and it depends how you define artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence for some people can mean basic automation through to self-learning, self-thinking outcomes. And it's quite a broad definition. And you see people use the word artificial intelligence on a very regular basis. One of the questions to ask when someone says it's artificial intelligence, ask simply, is it rules-based or not? If it's rules-based, then it's not self-learning. So you need to think through, is it really artificial intelligence or not? So knowing and understanding these things are critical. The big thing, though, is there's universal agreement by organisations that AI will change the way the world operates. In the short term, we're not necessarily seeing this, with maybe the exception of people using Alexa and Google Home, etc. You're seeing some of this creep into our daily lives. At a corporate level, it's a bit slower. Again, because of the data problem. Artificial intelligence needs data. Without good quality data, you have bad data, bad AI. An interesting example, talking to a health company earlier in the week, and this is the difference between privacy legislations in different countries. In China, they're able to use real patients to train their AI around e-health. In the US, they can't. They're using dummy patients, so people making up symptoms. When you make up a symptom and speak to an AI, it starts to skew the AI the wrong way around. So when we're using AI or using tools, etc., we need to think about what our inputs are, what the biases might be, and therefore what controls and outcomes we're expecting. So just flicking forward to in terms of the report itself. One of the things is knowledge is key. Now, some of you may have seen outside the room this morning some of these technologies on show. One of the ones I'd highlight is blockchain. Blockchain does have huge relevance, particularly for many businesses around supply chain. So VeChain's a good example, just an example, but VeChain's outside, if you look at them. They provide chips that are enabled through blockchain to track consumer goods. So when historically you bought your wallet, and it's got a little plastic card in there saying it's genuine, they now put a chip in the wallet, or a chip in the shoe in the case outside there, which means you can quickly scan it and see, is it registered or not? One of my colleagues, perhaps he's a bit foolish, he went to a high fashion shop in Hong Kong recently. He bought himself a jacket. This is from the brand shop. It had a QR on it. You can use QR codes which are not replicable. Again, goes back through a blockchain solution to say, is this from the designer or not? It wasn't. It's a $500 jacket sold in the label shop that was fake. So some of this is putting it back into the consumer, but if you can do this with QR codes, then you start getting to machine parts, you start getting to food, all sorts of things that enable your business, particularly from a supply chain and a control standpoint. We're seeing the use of drones very heavily in agribusiness, in terms of monitoring crops, monitoring fires, etc. We're using for stock takes as part of our work as auditors. Virtual reality, augmented reality, enables you to view things, look at things in different ways, and from a control standpoint, enables you to step into the virtual world and see things before they happen. IoT is very important. So in recent discussions with a very large manufacturer of electronic goods, they spoke across the table to one of their customers and said, I'm going to make less money from you going forward. And the reason being is because they can now predict failure more precisely, means last-minute repairs, last-minute replacements go down. So all other things equal, one company has less repair cost, so their cost base goes down. Other company has less revenue. So again, this is where controls step in, but they also step into the role of forecasting outcome expectation. So understanding all these things is key. So probably a little bit difficult to read up there. Controls are critical. Personally, and I'll come to COSO in a second, I don't believe there is a major change in the basic way we should be thinking about things. Things like RPA help us move faster forward. So many of you will be doing RPA programs in one shape or another. RPA is very good, but RPA also should be looked at with caution. RPA can be a band-aid. If you just automate something, you make it faster, it doesn't necessarily make it efficient. And RPA is dependent on the inputs and the outputs. We have seen organisations of varying degrees of scale implement RPA programs across the organisation, and what they haven't done is taken a step back, and I look at COSO, is look at the overall control environment, doing a risk assessment and saying, how do I know what robots are interacting with each other? So a good example is where a company had payments suddenly go out the door to wrong organisations. Because they didn't realise the RPA was linked to an underlying system and was automating the payment process, and someone made a change in the technology, not in the RPA. So understanding how your transactions flow is critical. As people in finance functions and control functions, one of our basic tasks is to understand the end-to-end. So from transaction initiation all the way through ledger, and understand how those transactions flow and what the independent points are. Knowing that is critical. So COSO is very, very relevant. It's even more relevant when we start thinking about AI. Because AI, you've got a big risk. Can you actually explain what's going on? And like it or not, you are accountable. You're accountable to your shareholders, your broader stakeholders, to regulators, etc. I use big companies as examples because often they're investing heavily and at the cutting edge of this. The advantage we have if you're in a smaller organisation is not to be bleeding edge, but fast follow where it makes sense. On AI, BlackRock actually just turned off some of their AI in November last year because they could not explain what was going in the model. If you can't explain what's going on, the risk is high. That's where the risk assessment process is very important. To understand the risks, understand the expectations of what's going to be there. Can you explain it? Can you prove it or not? Sometimes you can't prove AI, it's not possible. But can you have hypotheses around it which enable you to think through? So again, this goes back to, and I'll keep repeating, around the knowledge perspective. Learning about these things is very, very important. So what are leading organisations doing? They're looking at technology and talent. And this is where they're investing. This doesn't have to be always in terms of my organisation. Do I have to go and hire data scientists? But our organisations, an example would be Data Robot. Data Robot, which is based here, provides AI as a service, provides analytics as a service. You don't need to have all these things in-house. So it's thinking through how do I best do things and how do I leverage what I have. Investing in education as an example. One of the large unicorns 2 weeks ago shared they're putting their entire management team through a 3-day leadership course on innovation. This is a unicorn doing a 3-day course on innovation. They've already made their billion plus. In fact, I think last funding round was $4 billion plus. So the time into education is critical because whilst we're not necessarily adopting things now as fast as we'd like, it will happen. And that learning curve is critical. So the big underpin to this is business and controls knowledge are critical as well. Understanding what my company does, what data I need, what tools can enable me, and where those tools sit is the most critical things. You don't have to have all the answers, but knowing what's out there is really important. To reimagine what your company can leverage or not. But it is getting back to basics. I see too many times, and I have data scientists working for me, where they come up with wonderful solutions, but they're in a void of actually business context. So it's business leaders, it's CFOs, it's internal controls, people can say, hey, skeptical mindset, does this make sense? How does it tie to my business goals, my strategy, and how do I make sure I'm in control? And sometimes, what's the risk? If the risk is lower, then push it. If the risk is high, then you need to hold back. So it's really, I think there's a big sort of throwback here in terms of thinking things, taking a step back, looking at frameworks like COSO, thinking around internal control as an enabler, not as a disabler. So happy to take questions later when we go through the panel discussion or afterwards, but thank you very much for your time.